Welcome to RebootEd, the podcast where we talk about big ideas in education and hardly ever come up with any answers. I'm Mike Vollmer, your host. Andrew Schwab, my co-host, can't join us today, but we're very, very excited to have Jerome Burg from Google Lit Trips with us. Jerome, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
It's my pleasure, Mike.
I had the chance of finally meeting you face-to-face at the Leadership Development Institute for Q. But we didn't get a whole lot of chance to talk there because it was a pretty busy agenda. But we did get a chance to kind of finalize a time to get you on, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Google Lit Trips is fascinating to me from a couple standpoints. Obviously, the educational side of this is really cool, but then I'm really curious to hear from you about why you started it and what the evolution of this has done. So tell us a little bit about Google Lit Trips and how it got started.
Well, I happen to have been invited to be in the, I call it the guinea pig crowd for the very first Google Teacher Academy in Mountain View, because I happen to live across the bay from Google. And when I went there, I didn't know if I'd joined a cult or whatever, I don't know. I'd been an Apple Distinguished Educator, and this sounded like a good thing, and several of my friends were invited because they live nearby. And when I was there at the Academy, what they did is the Google Teacher Academy or institutes, I'm not sure what they call them nowadays, but they were showing us all of their products, which was a pretty small line in 2006. Fall of 2006, and when the guy from Google Earth got up, he was showing, he was one of the developers, and he broadcast Google Earth on the screen, and I'd played with it. I thought it was invented so that I could find my home on it. But there was a line across the screen, and they'd already asked us, they'd already said, we'd like you to commit to doing some advocacy for us before the end of the school year. And that made me a little bit nervous because I was already doing a lot of stuff for Apple at the time. And I said, well, what's that line? And he said, well, that's the path tool. You can draw lines anywhere you want. And a lot of people might know Diane Main, who is very active in all of these worlds that we're all kind of interacting in. She was sitting right next to me, and I said, I think I've got one of the advocacies. I've taught Candide 100 times over the last 30 years. I'm just going to mark his travels on the surface of Google Earth. And it was that fast. It was just a second. And she thought it was a pretty good idea. And so I went home and started marking all of Candide's travels. And I thought this was pretty cool. And I was just playing around with it between the fall and Macworld in January in San Francisco. And at Macworld, I was taking a pre-day workshop, and one of my other dear friends, Carol Ann McGuire, that many people know, was sitting next to me, and I says, hey, you want to see this thing I'm diddling around with? And I showed it to her, and she said, what are you going to do with it? And I go, I don't know, I'll just give it away to whoever wants it. And she said, you have to go home tonight and buy a URL, which I had never done before. And, I just thought, teachers make up things and then they share them with whoever likes it. So, but Carol Ann's got some passion and some enthusiasm, and it was a 2-day workshop, so I knew I couldn't come back the next day without finding out how to buy a domain name. And I went home, and we had purchased them at school through GoDaddy. So I went there and said, well, what do you want? And I wasn't too serious, so I made up this joke calling it coming up with Google Lit Trips, because I figured, well, if I give it away, people can say, I could ask the question in every one of my talks, hey, if you want to know about John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, what would you do? And I would prompt them to say, well, I'd Google it. And I'd say, oh, Google Lit. You've heard of my website, as in Google Lit, not Google It.
Nice.
And so I was about that curious, and I bought it. And so in trying to come up with the second advocacy, a few of us who were there at that very first Teachers Academy decided, well, we'll try and put on some summer workshops for Alameda County Office of Ed and Marin County Office of Ed. And I spilled the beans that I'd been working on this thing and diddling around with a website, because that's the only way I could figure to give them away, was to put them on the internet. And that leaked out on March 7th, my little counter on my website jumped from like 440 over 5 months or so to like over 1,000 in one day. And I couldn't figure out what it was. It turns out that one of the people had leaked that I was going to talk about this little project I had, and Will Richardson had picked it up. And I had no idea who he was at the time. Boy, does he have a lot of followers. By the end of the month, I had 5,000 visitors and 2 lit trips to share. It's sort of like trying to inviting people to a party and everybody shows up while I'm just getting out of the shower and haven't put the food out yet.
And you were just expecting a couple close friends, right?
Yeah, and I knew there's only 5 people who know about this. In fact, the 400 hits that I had at the beginning of that day were all me, because I was tweaking the website, then I'd go look at it and tweak it and go look at it. So we're now at close to 3 million visitors to the website, and I have been running to play catch-up ever since.
And when you say we, do you have some collaborators with this now, or is this still pretty much the Jerome Burg show?
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, because I've won a couple of awards since then, right off the bat. I mean, people were publishing articles about it in ISTE magazine and book things, and I'm trying to get a few more lit trips. I guess at first, I've always described it as sort of a paying it forward gift to my senior high school English teacher, who turned me on to the real value of literature, and I figured he was the guy I dedicated my whole career to. It's like I wanted to be for students what he had been for me, and so I'm going to be for teachers as I fade out of the classroom what Mr. K had been for me, and share with it. But along the way, it became necessary to, well, not necessary so much, but I was, one of the awards I won sort of led to an attorney doing pro bono work for me, so I could become tax exempt. And so now I use we when I refer to GLT Global Ed, the official corporate name, because I wanted to get away from having Google in the corporate name. It's not, they've allowed me to have it as it is, and they love it, but it's also hard to write grants if you have Google in your name. So
Google's got so much money. Why do you need a grant? Yeah.
So the answer to your question is I started to say we, as in I don't own it anymore, because nonprofits aren't owned by me. But it is basically a program where people started sending me lit trips, and I started inviting educators, and through educators, students, to submit lit trips. And so, there are quite a few people who have volunteered to also contribute in a philanthropic sense to the project and to the profession. So it's we, but I'm kind of like a one-man show, keeping it running.
Right. And by the way, if you're one of the possibly few people who's not heard of this before, GoogleLitTrips.com is a really cool website. And you've got how many lit trips are on this now?
I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 or so, and also I link out to lit trips created by a gentleman who teaches in Atlanta, where he has his kids do lit trips that are essentially based on nonfiction books that are also read in classes. And I have about 6 in production right now. And I've also moved to trying to expand it beyond just tracking great literature with sort of pedagogical content that stimulates sort of the kind of thinking we want great literature to do, to saying, you know, the reason why that kind of literature is so popular is because all of our lives are journeys. And so a lot of great writers have sort of created journey trips. And now I'm starting to invite people to write their own stories and then package them either as in a Google Lit Trip format, which are KMZ files that you open and read in Google Earth, or the brand new Google storytelling site that I'm incredibly excited about is Google Tour Builder. And I've had an opportunity to actually work with, in fact, I even presented with one of the developers of Tour Builder a couple of weeks ago in Mountain View. And it's so much easier than working with Google Earth is at the moment, that I think it's really going to be much more accessible for kids, basically, I think, second grade. In fact, I'm going to be doing 100 third grade teachers in a couple of weeks on Google Lit Trips, and I firmly believe that third graders can do this.
So you're envisioning transitioning from actually just using Google Earth the way we've kind of seen it for the past several years, and now adopting the Tour Builder kind of front end to this thing. Will all of that kind of curate onto the website the same way?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing because I've presented at every single Geo Teacher Institute for Google. I wound up being a founding member of Google's Geo Teacher Advisory Board. And
okay.
So I just got back from Pittsburgh on Thursday, where we did. Tuesday, Wednesday, we did an institute, but on Monday we met as the advisory board. And I can tell you this, Google Earth is going to be changed quite a bit in the near future, modernized, and I'm in that position where I'm in that gray area where I have an awful lot of Google contacts, but I'm not a Googler, and so there are things that have been dropped as what our advisor says is, I can put some points if you want to connect the dots.
Yeah.
I don't actually know where they're going, but it's pretty clear that that they want to make it easy, they want to make it collaborative. Everybody's speculating that they may want to make it go online, and so the whole process is I'm going to keep both strands alive, and sort of encourage people to do both, but I don't know what building them is going to look like when they get around to releasing the new Google Earth.
Yeah. So kids and teachers right now can kind of use this concept, and they can create their own Google Lit Trips. You mentioned that you've got some in production now, so I assume there's some sort of vetting process or some way that before it gets added to your site, do you authenticate it, check it against the book? What's your process for actually adding it to the website?
That's really, I'm glad you asked that, Mike, because it's a very important question. People want it to be a wiki where anybody can throw anything up. In fact, there's an awful lot of people out there who think that the term Google Lit Trips is sort of a generic term, and they're building them, and which is, the kind of flattery that is the kind of copying of an idea that is very flattering, and I appreciate that. However, I want them vetted for a couple of very important issues. One is pedagogy. I don't want this to become anything like, and I don't mean to malign SparkNotes or those kinds of literary things, but it's possible to go to SparkNotes instead of reading a book.
I've mentioned my daughter's experience as an AP English student. I'm actually sending her off to college this year. And she's gone through 4 years of AP English in a world where the pedagogy was, here's a worksheet with all sorts of things that you need to tell about these great works of literature.
Right.
And she and her classmates figured out early on that reading the book is not the most efficient way to get a good grade on those worksheets and the product that the teachers were expecting, and instead they go to Spark Notes or Wikipedia or Cliff Notes or
Rent the movie, or
yeah, or any number of online sources, and they find all of the information laid out for them in terms of plot and character development and those sorts of things. If they sit down and read the book and they have to deduce all this stuff on their own, it's a much more gooey sort of journey for them. And when, unfortunately, we kind of put the emphasis on these kids getting grades and marching through these programs, and I feel terrible that she's part of that process, because there's a lot of books that we've talked about a little bit, but she's actually never read them. She got really good grades, but she's never really read the books. And I really liked seeing in your website that this isn't a shortcut, that it's actually meant to enhance the reading experience, but the expectation is still for the kids to read the book and actually kind of immerse themselves in the author's journey in writing the book.
Immerse themselves in that, and the basic premise is anywhere that's mentioned as a location in a story, we put a place mark, and in the place mark there may be media links that go off to some historical reference that was made in the book. When stories are set in real places, whether they're fiction or not, there's a reason for the real place being there. So that place comes with terrain, it comes with weather, it comes with Dust Bowl kinds of effects in Grapes of Wrath, it comes with history and tradition and culture. And so what we try to do is say, well, that media can be used for anything to enhance, three-dimensionalize, it's what I like to call it, three-dimensionalize the reading experience, and we go out of our way not to actually summarize what was happening in this part of the book. Although when kids make a lit trip, summarizing may be precisely what they ought to be doing, because that might be one of the learning objectives or standards to your grade level. But I don't want teachers telling them these are the 5 plot issues, these are the main characters. That, we ask discussion starters. I don't call them questions, but something that says, here's something to think about in what you either are about to read in flipped classrooms. It's kind of nice. A lot of teachers are using this as read the section of this, take the trip for the chapters we're going to discuss tonight, and check out what the lit trip says about it, and get you pre-thinking about the kinds of questions that just don't have right answers or wrong answers. They have, higher level contemplative, critical thinking responses, where a pretty intelligent kid or a thoughtful kid can really build a interesting conversation on either side of what a character might have chosen to do. And then we also try to end those discussion starters with at least one discussion starter that brings it back to their own lives. So what's that got to do with me? I'm not going to grow up in 1930 when there's a financial depression and we're worried about immigrants. And I go, oh, really?
Oh, hey. Exactly.
And building that bridge is really kind of the engagement point. Yeah. This is really about discovering the real relevance of listening to these people's, these people articulating the great wisdom of that literature brings to us. So I kind of work on that side. I get a lot of IT people who want to do it and who don't necessarily know language arts and literacy pedagogy, but they know the technology, perhaps. I know a lot of language arts people are really good teachers, and they know what kinds of open-ended questions to ask or issues to raise, but they're not really up to speed on a good use of the technology. For example, most of the ones I get, in spite of the fact that none of the ones I have on the website are like this, they just leave the traditional bird's eye view looking down on the Google Earth surface. Yeah. Well, that's because that's what we're used to doing with maps, and we're used to having north at the top and south at the bottom and east and west. But humans don't see that, and so just tilting the view, zooming in a little bit, rotating the view. For example, in Grapes of Wrath, we rotate it so we're looking down Route 66, which means west is at the top
Yeah.
of the map, and we're looking at here's where we are, there's where we hope to be if the story works out the way we're hoping it works out. And so we're getting a time reference, we're getting what language arts teachers like to call suspension of disbelief. We're trying to fall into the story as though I'm writing in that old jalopy sitting next to these people, looking out the windshield, or waddling around Boston in Make Way for Ducklings for the little children's book. Or the other example I always use is sitting in that railroad car with Elie Wiesel in the night as he's being shuffled off to the concentration camps. Wow. Putting people inside the story, it's pretty easy to sort of begin to connect that empathy with the characters when you're taking the ride along with them.
But that suspension of disbelief is, I mean, that's a standard sort of technique that we use in film too, right?
Sure, exactly.
I mean, if you want to get somebody engaged or engrossed in a piece of literature or a film work or, I mean, a math project, it's really right. It's a matter of bringing that right into the students' the students' experience and letting them immerse themselves as much as you can.
You know, that's exactly right. And if you don't mind, there's a gentleman, Tom Petra, who created realworldmath.org, and he essentially said, I love the lit trip thing, I'm going to do it with math. So he uses that same kind of structure to teach math at every grade level or to provide the resources. And that's a wonderful resource. But the other thing about movie is, what do you start with? A long shot, right? What's the setting? And then you close in and you start meeting the characters, and then you get into a conversation with the characters, and then the movie starts. And that's visual storytelling, and we use that as well. Most first views are long shots that say, oh, we're in the United States, or oh, we're in the South. Well, now we're closing in on this one spot where the story starts. So
set the scene, identify the characters, and then lay out the general plot.
Right, but we're not telling them any of that stuff. They're seeing that as they start marching from one place mark to the next, and the view gets shifted because we can control the view. Yeah.
So, but that kind of gets back to we don't want this to be Cliff Notes, so exactly. Still have to have the student kind of read the book and deduce where they are and what's going on by virtue of reading reading the piece and then connecting that to what they can see from what you've done on the website.
Right. And you know, the one thing I don't want, and unfortunately, there's a lot of research suggesting that, as you mentioned with your daughter, who's a perfectly bright person, boy, they don't seem to be having time to do the reading, and so they're trying to shortcut it because they've got all this other heavy stuff on their plate. And so I don't want it to be things like, well, we're going to ask questions where you're going to have to prove to me that you did the reading. Because that puts the kid back, that takes them right out of suspension of disbelief and puts them right into, this is really a test packaged differently.
Right.
And so, no, these are things to think about. And don't you have things in your own life that kind of are similar to the decision these characters are making?
Yeah, and you mentioned Grapes of Wrath and these current issues we have with a stressed economy and issues with immigration and border issues and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, going back and seeing how that was processed and addressed in the 30s and the economic factors that forced the sort of migrations that were taking place then. There's a lot of similarities in terms of what's happening.
There's a lot of similarities. And what's really nice is I kind of take the position, there's nothing that I am more honored by when a former student and I touch base and I discover that student has become an English teacher. Two of my former students are English teachers at the school where I taught for a lot of years. And that's very moving to me to know that maybe I did fulfill my promise to Mr. K, who I never made that promise to him because he passed away before I came up with this. But I also don't think that I want to necessarily think that teaching literature, the job of teaching literature is to make English majors. I think the job of teaching literature is to get everybody discovering there's value in thinking about the stories that we read, because everyone's a mirror of somebody's life, fictional or not, caught in the same kinds of predicaments between bad guys and good guys, and whatever it is.
Right.
And they fail sometimes, and we get to look at their motivations and whether that works out for them or not. And so it's not the kind of thing that shows up on a Common Core standardized test. But I also address that because, well, taking Grapes of Wrath again, they go through a Hooverville. Well, there's a link. The third element besides the media and discussion starter are web links and supplemental information. So you can go out and say, what's this Hooverville business? And suddenly the kids are doing informational reading. That is a perfect Venn diagram with the literary reading they're doing.
Right. And then, I'm thinking pedagogically as a teacher, as I have them go off and do that research, then the writing can kind of link back to what they know about these real places and what they know about how Steinbeck was using that in the context of what he wrote, and the storyline is as they kind of migrate through these sorts of places. That, to me, and that hopefully is the kind of thinking and the kind of processing that we want to sort of elicit from Common Core testing. But I mean, we'll see.
Exactly. It's just a little difficult to come up with those personal connection kinds of questions.
Right.
Did the kid take some value from it? I can ask questions that ask him or her to demonstrate advanced literacy skills. Did you see that extended metaphor, and did you see that historical reference, or did you catch a theme? But the best reading is like the best lessons come from Vygotsky, the zone of proximal development. It comes from that just touching where that kid can say, you know what, I've got a connection to that. My dad lost his job last year during the crash, or I saw this kid who just came to our school from Mexico or someplace being really treated poorly at school. They were making fun of him because he couldn't speak English very well. Well, Steinbeck noticed the same thing, but he's putting you he's putting you in the position of being the person trying to better your life and feed your families and have security, and you're being the victim of the same kinds of things. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. One question I had, you mentioned the realwordmath.org and a math teacher who's kind of using the same concept. As an old oceanography teacher, when I was kind of looking through the site and getting a feel for how this thing was put together with Google Earth, I think about Steinbeck writing. He wrote a book that I used to have my students read called The Log from the Sea of Cortez, and it was a journey that he took down to Baja, Mexico.
Exactly.
Are there science teachers that are doing this, or history teachers that are doing this? And is there any? Are you working on kind of expanding from just a literature focus to other disciplines by expanding the scope of the works that get included in your site?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I've been toying with that idea that what I'd like to do is create what we used to call on the internet a ring, where there'd be a ring of websites, all of them connecting to each other or endorsing each other. And so I would endorse Thomas's website where he's doing math, and I would endorse Carol LaRoe's website where she's doing his Google historical voyages and events. And then there are science people. I can't grab one right out of my head at the moment. I'm pretty darn busy I have 1,100 requests for titles
Oh, geez. Okay.
of literature. But with that ring concept, the other thing about that is I like to go cross-curricular in cross-curricular and cross-cultural.
Hmm.
In so global, reaching out for the global ed, sort of interest in the 21st century sort of future of education, and cross-curricular, which is very difficult sometimes to pull off in high school, so to speak. But
Yeah.
there are math problems in Grapes of Wrath Lit Trip, and there are links to distribution of wealth uh, charts also in that one, and how come so many people have this and so many people have this. And so I'm really bringing the history in, and if I can stick some math in there, that's great, and if I can stick some cultural exploration in there, I just think that's wonderful. And I don't actually tell people to use these as prescriptive, like an application. An awful lot of people download it and say, "Well, I tried to watch it, but I couldn't get it to open." Well, that's you have to have Google Earth, and I have a step guide for that. But I don't want it to be passive. People want to make the tour so I can sit and watch the thing. I'm saying, "Oh, we're going to take all the side trips that come into any teacher's mind." So. There might be a teacher who has actually been an oceanographer, and I'd love to do the Sea of Cortez.
That's a marvelous book. And there are others that I kind of thought of just, from my old wheelhouse. But
Have you ever? Let's see, you're here in California, someplace, aren't you?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
right on the coast, very close to the Channel Islands.
So one of the things I started doing when Google came out with its mobile version of Google Earth, was trying to create walking tours. And the first one I did was down Cannery Row.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I've got an iPad that has GPS in it, right? Because it's a 3G. Most schools don't have that.
Uh-huh.
But I thought, I'm going to get ahead of the curve. And as you walk down the street, you go by Doc's lab.
Right, which is still there. Yeah.
It's still there, and I've toured that place, and it's just
As have I.
blending of the science and the stories. And so, I just want to broaden things to everything, because geography is everywhere. That's its definition, and literature is everything. It doesn't limit it to just people who read. It limits, people who want to get rich, and people who are inventors, and people who are in every field.
Yeah.
Right? And it's always an opportunity to, well, this person said, "Oh yeah, I went to this music academy." Oh well, let's put a link down to that academy, and people can go explore that. So I don't want teachers to tell kids, although I don't preclude it if that's their style, don't just tell your kids to go and just do everything and answer every question. Why don't you sort of decide how you want to build it in? And what's becoming very popular is this sort of flipped classroom concept. That is, having the kids read and just kind of follow along on the lit trip the night before. And then class discussions just start, and it's okay. What'd you do with that math? What happened when you calculated that cost of living for the Jode family when 6 people had to work 6 hours to buy enough food and we had a shopping list even in the story, to feed their family for one day. And then they realized, oh, those prices aren't cheap. Those prices got 6 people, 6 hours to pay for one meal. This is, so.
And there's a whole economics lesson in that.
Exactly. And so there are no walls that I put there, although, underlying it's that the stage is geography, and that brings a whole lot to the story. And the primary focus is the story, but the story isn't limited to what are the themes and who are the characters and why should we admire John Steinbeck. We should admire him, but that's not the goal of reading John Steinbeck. That's why he's admired.
Well, and I was going to say one of the questions I always used to ask my students is why are we reading this author? I mean, everybody tells us Steinbeck's like the greatest American author, but my question is why? Why him and not somebody else? What is it that he has done or shared or seen? And a lot of students struggle with that kind of stuff.
Of course, because they're looking to know what the right answer is going to be when they get asked that question. And I just think, as important as it is to those students who may go off to be English majors or anything associated, I'm not saying it's unimportant, but it's a little misdirecting. I used to start every one of my classes with, we're going to be reading a few stories, and they are essentially the advisors. I want you to look at these authors as life advisors. They know you're not going to grow up in 17th century France and like Candide, or the 30s depression like Steinbeck, or hopefully not like knights taking people off to the concentration camps, although this week's news is all about some very horrendous genocide going on. And so it's the fact that it still happens, and these people were advising us not on their times and places so much as on the nature of being a human being and hoping that we are also wanting to be humane beings. And so, that's what literature brings, the wisdom. But it's not to be memorized, it's to be discovered. That is kind of cool.
And discussed. So, from the standpoint of putting all this stuff together, when you have an opportunity to see what actually transpires with teachers and their students, what sort of changes in pedagogy do you kind of observe? Is it actually getting ingrained into various teachers' pedagogies to change things in significant ways? And if so, what are you seeing?
So that's an embarrassing question for a live broadcast.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do it that way.
Until I became a nonprofit, and that only happened last November, and until the demand got so big that I just couldn't manage it myself, I collected no data other than, holy mackerel, there are a lot of people blogging about it and writing articles about it and saying all these wonderful things about it, and including it in books. And I collected a lot of nice things. That's all called qualitative rather than quantitative data. And so all I can tell you is the people who communicate with me, I've started asking them questions that will at least start getting me that, because I can't apply for grants, and now it's bigger than I can manage essentially efficiently. So sooner or later it's going to get to the point where I need an income stream that will help me get people to create those kinds of surveys for me and collect that data and synthesize the data and help me streamline the process of getting more published. So I don't have a good answer, except for I have not found, and I have a Google alert set for Google Lit trips, and in 7 years there has only been one negative blog post and thousands of positive blog posts. And the negative one, I got a hold of the guy and we talked, and he actually retracted what he had said, because he had taken it at sort of a simple level that I just pointed out to him that there's depth. There's a real design to the discussion starters, a real design to the packaging of this. But to tell you the truth, I had nothing but overwhelmingly, almost embarrassing for a guy my age. I mean, I don't want to be starstruck, and I'm too old for that, but can you believe, like I said, like closing in on 3 million people?
Well, And it's global. I mean, this isn't just a phenomenon here in the United States that people are using this.
Yeah, I think last documented was 143 countries.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah.
But that, I mean, just on a personal level, how does that feel? I mean, you started this as just an outcropping of some conversations and kind of an idea that you wanted to play with, and now it's like this huge tool or this great resource for people all over the world. That's got to have a sense of personal gratification for you.
Extremely, extremely. I am so honored by the fact that so many teachers have told me so often and so intensely how wonderful they think the resource is, that I just feel like I don't know what I believe in terms of whether Mr. K can be aware of what's going on in wherever he may be. But metaphorically, I am so proud to be able to return that favor that he returned to me and gift it to all the teachers who seem to find it to be very useful. And I was in Pittsburgh last week at the Google Teacher Academy, and I was the greeter on people coming in and trying to, where are you from, and what do you do, and why are you coming to a Geo Institute thing? And this one woman came up to me, and within a minute she almost had me in tears at her, not only her gratitude, but the story she told me was that she took the Lit Trip concept to ESL kids who were sort of being treated as, the
second-class learners.
You're coming to our school,
yeah,
but we don't know you, we don't know your culture, and they were sort of invisible kids, and she had them doing personal immigration stories and sharing them, and they became real people in to themselves, their perception of who they were on campus, and to many of the kids on campus were just seeing them as, yeah, you're real people, and your stories are really interesting and not unlike our own, and I was just like, that's my paycheck, and I tell them, I don't take a penny of personal income out of this. It's like a stealth project because I use free stuff. Google fortunately loves it so much that I don't have to market it, and that's my reward. That means much to me that I can still contribute to what's happening in classrooms around the world. Gosh.
Oh yeah,
it's unbelievable too.
That's just incredible stuff. And you've looking at your website, you've even got this thing curated into grade levels. You've got higher ed stuff. You've got kindergarten stuff, and teachers can go there and actually find works all through a student's educational career that are all. Is this categorized by reading level or?
Well, when I began, I thought I have to have a place to give stuff away, and so I got the website, and then within about within that first month after Will Richardson blogged, I got an email. This is kind of a funny story. I got an email from a second grade teacher saying, we created a lit trip, and we're wondering if you might want to take a look at it. And it never occurred to me that at the core of the concept, it's really a universally solid idea for literacy and literature teaching. And so I thought, oh man, second grade, well, if it's second grade, then all the grades might be interested. And I started getting some submissions. But in that very same week, I got an email from a college professor, and I'll try to be as obtuse as possible here, because actually it's 7 years ago. So he said, I love your website. This is fabulous. I teach graduate students. Is there any chance you're going to do Dante's Inferno?
Oh.
I said, well, I don't know that Google has mapped hell yet. uh,
Purgatory is not on the map?
Not on the map. But
Okay.
I'll tell you, outer space is, so I'm heading for mythology, too.
Well,
And,
and the
uh,
oceans are.
and oceans on it. And in fact, they were showing us, I don't know if you've gone to Google Maps views, where
Yeah.
they're doing all these three-dimensional photography, full 360-degree photography. In fact, I've just completed the shooting for 4 of those. They're not published yet, but a complete walkthrough of the John Steinbeck Center in Salinas and his childhood home, and
Oh, wow.
Eugene O'Neill's home here in Danville. And I also did a one-room schoolhouse, but I'm sort of waiting to get those things officially approved and published. But those are going to become a facet also of Google Literature, literary locations. And so when I went through all the paperwork and the permissions to do Eugene O'Neill's home, that happens to be managed by the National Park Service. There's a lot of paperwork there. And
Oh, yeah.
as soon as they were kind of clued into what I was doing, the first thing they said to me is, this house does not have handicap access to the second story. Visitors can go there, but we've always wondered how we can share this with handicap, and we can't build access onto the house. And they were very excited to universalize the access to the upstairs for people who can't get to where I live, or can get there but can't get upstairs.
Sure.
The same thing happened when I went to the John Steinbeck home, which is not associated with the Steinbeck Center, although they're 2 blocks apart. They don't let people go upstairs because the architecture just can't handle, the staircase just can't handle that kind of tourist traffic, but they let me shoot upstairs. And so all of a sudden I'm solving their problem, because everybody who goes there, it's actually, they run it as a restaurant and use the profits to maintain the home. They're a nonprofit as well. Everybody says, can we go upstairs? Can we go upstairs? No, you can't. Well, now we're getting a kind of access that is just unbelievable. Kids can go on a field trip walking through all of these wonderful places virtually if they can't.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned Cannery Row. I wonder if they would let you do that in Doc Ricketts' lab, because that's a place that most people don't get to visit.
They don't get to visit there, and I don't know. I actually contacted them when I started this project. The problem with Doc Ricketts' lab is it's co-owned by 4 people privately and the city of Monterey. My friend at the Steinbeck Center said, well, here's the guy you got to talk to. And basically he wasn't as enthusiastic as I'd hoped he'd be. But I have shared when I went through, I met Michael Hemp, who's the guy who organizes all of those Cannery Row, the trips through the Doc's lab. And once I get these published, I'm going to go back. The guy from Monterey Museum said, maybe at a later date, we're kind of really busy doing other things and there's complications. So once I get done with these, I'm going to touch base with Michael Hemp and recontact them, and then I can show them what I've done, which might make it more inviting.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
well, and I mean, again, I'm just throwing my passions out there, but my access is through the Monterey Bay Aquarium Education Department, but the history that's down there and the ties to the oceans were just kind of the sort of thing that I tried to get into my class back in the day. But
there's no reason why they can't do the Voyage of the Beagle.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Well, there's some reasons in the anti-evolution corners of the world. But,
well, the boat sailed. They,
yes.
They can't. I think it'd be hard to say the Beagle never existed.
No, but that would be.
Yeah.
But anywhere you go, my wife and I, we want to get to the Galapagos Islands someday. It's a bucket list item. That and the hike to Machu Picchu,
right,
are often in one package. And so that hike into Machu Picchu, and I actually met some people who work for the Galapagos Islands nonprofit thing, and it just seems like taking people there virtually, particularly in a place like Galapagos Islands, which, you know, they have a real limited amount of access to it.
Yeah.
Would be just spectacular to stimulate science and those kinds of ideas. And it would sell science not because it's on the test, it would sell science because science is exciting.
Yeah, yeah, and it's real, and it's there to look at. But if you don't have the chance to actually get there,
right,
these sorts of things are clearly the next best thing.
And so one of my first published personal stories is from a student who had been invited to be on a junior diabetes conference in Washington, D.C. And of course, you know, I've had a lot of kids with diabetes, and they do feel, whether they're treated this way or not, they do feel like they're not just the same as other kids. And some of them keep secrets, and some of them, you know, they're just not happy with having to take shots or whatever they have to do.
Right.
Well, she got to be one of 2 state representatives from her state. And she told a very simple story about going from where she lives to Washington, D.C., and meeting Mary Tyler Moore and meeting the president and getting to present in front of a congressional committee herself. And all of a sudden, her story is a personal story that was so meaningful in her life that I'm hoping that that becomes sort of tantalizing to other kids who have done something beyond what they ever thought they could do or would do, and share it. And they'd all be sort of positive experience. You know, I survived a terrible experience, or I discovered that I actually could get to the top of Half Dome.
Yeah.
You know, and I see just that being a wonderful, wonderful collection of stories.
That would be great from a number of standpoints. I mean, you know, just the informational side, but also the inspirational side.
Exactly.
For other kids to know that, hey, challenges don't preclude you from accomplishing your dreams.
Right, right. And going off onto that journey outside of where you have ever been, that's the story. And you always learn something, and you always get rewarded if you start kind of noticing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So on Twitter, you're at Google Lit Trips. It's googlelittrips.com.
I'm starting to switch that to, I haven't actually done it, but in my references, I'm referencing googlelittrips.org, because I have both of them. Currently, .org just, you know, sends you to .com.
Redirects.
Yeah, but in this, and I'm getting entirely new website is being designed, so it will have more capacity for some of these wonderful ideas that I'm envisioning and getting started on. But .com or .org will get you there.
Okay, great. And finally, you've got a vision for expanding this. Where do you see this going in the future? In all of these directions? Do you have a plan for how this is going to spread out? You're going to bring more people into the organization and the process, perhaps?
Well, I hope so. That's where some fundraising might have to come in to bring them actually into the organization. But I want to open it to anything. If you'll notice on the website, as a matter of fact, right now, I think in the right-hand column, down a little ways, there's a little kind of a rotating images. Well, that's a blog I keep that is essentially reading about reading. And so one of the things I do most mornings is get up and I just search for interesting articles either on pedagogy or just that promote a love of literature that can be shared with kids. In fact, I put one up this morning that it's kind of a cartoon that that tells, you know, basically about 8 plots in literature, and they all play out different ways. And so it can be things that teachers might want to use, or they might want to share with their students. Weird Al Yankovic just came out with a song, with an album a couple of months ago, and I'm just blanking on it, but it's about using language, using words. And so I blogged about that. And so, a lot of language arts, a lot of teachers, no matter what their curriculum, I don't have time to be reading all the articles and all of that other stuff. I got papers to correct on. So I'm kind of acting as an editor, coming from my point of view. This is what I'd do with this article if I were still in the classroom. Or I might use this to engage these kids. I mean, everything from fancy bookcases that people build and sell on different websites. So I'm trying to reach all things reading. A lot more nonfiction on the way, perhaps. A lot, maybe collaborating with my friend Tom, who's doing the math, realworldmath.org, to say, let's bring something together here where we find a new territory to go. But if I can make even the remotest connection that I think would have value to educators and students, literary locations, literary events, and, literary games, all kinds of stuff that says, there's a lot of people out there that like this stuff for a good reason. And it's not just the storytelling; it's the sharing of wisdom and lives. I have a lot of articles on that blog going directly to research on what literature brings to the world that is an add-on or the sort of counterpoint or the Venn diagram with informational reading. It brings empathy. There's a lot of science. Stanford's doing some great stuff on neuroscience in literature.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I can dig up those. Those are a little bit older, but I could find them pretty easily and send you links if you like to that.
Oh yeah, if you would, please do that, and we'll put them up on the website so folks can refer to them. And obviously we'll put the link to your website up so people can get to that. Like they don't know about it already, but
well, I got to warn you about that. My wife says, Jerome, you're very, very famous in a very small corner of the world.
Well, that small corner isn't so small, Jerome.
No, I appreciate that, but I do. I don't know. I guess I'm a little modest about that side of the success.
Yeah.
I don't want to be false modesty, but because I'm very happy that what I do know about its reach has been more than I ever dreamed about in my life.
And its reach is phenomenal. And I got to tell you, it's such an honor to get to talk to you, and we very, very much appreciate you taking the time to share with us. This will all go up on our website so that it'll be archived and people can refer to it again, and we'll put the links. So please do send me the research that you were talking about, and we'll put that up also.
And when do you suppose that'll go up on your site? Because I just might blog about it.
Well, hopefully within the next week.
Okay.
A lot of that depends on Andrew and his expertise, because when I try to put it up, he usually yells at me.
Well, I am, as I mentioned, and these aren't just empty words, I'm so honored that both of you contacted me and wanted to do this, and it means a lot that people that I have a great deal of respect for are out there singing its praises.
Well, it's a hugely valuable resource for a lot of folks, and I'm just I'm astounded and so impressed with the quality of what you've done and how you've put it together. I think it's a model for a lot of people's sort of ventures into how we can share these things and how we can get them out there in really useful ways. And hopefully we can see these kinds of things grow and the impact on pedagogy continue to move more towards a student-centric kind of quality endeavor instead of just focusing on testing and
there is a lot of research, and I don't know that I have that at my fingertips, but if I'll spend some time seeing if I can find it, that says, if you really teach them the critical reading skills to find the value of literature they're going to do fine on those tests.
Yeah. In fact, the success on the test is sort of ancillary to what the students are doing in the classroom. It's not even the challenging thing for students to sort of demonstrate. In a small way, we had Joshua Davis from Wired magazine on a while back, and he talked about some students in Matamoros, Mexico, where the teacher went away from the traditional pedagogical approach and just started posing questions to the kids. And they got more and more detailed and more challenging. And at the end of the year, when they took the standardized test, the students were hugely successful. They did exceptionally well on the test. But the students' concept was, well, yeah, our teacher kind of told us to do it, so we did it, but it wasn't that fun. Questions weren't that difficult. Wasn't that interesting. But we took the test and we answered the questions.
Well, I don't want to leave your audience thinking that I'm against the tests. I firmly believe that educators and their students need to be assessed for achieving what they need to achieve.
Right.
I just think that the testing and literary benefits is a little more difficult to design and may have a margin of error that may not be as solid as in other areas. So I'm not opposed to it. In fact, that's why I really, as I mentioned, I really want to bring Common Core support through all of my resources, to speak about it, make sure, we've had information reading. We're asking kids to potentially do some writing and speaking and making videos so that the media inside of their lit trips is actually speaking and writing measurable. And so
well, those practices, if the Common Core can kind of parse that stuff out, then I think I agree with you that the process for students is a lot more valid and it's going to have a lot more meaning, and probably be a lot more authentic in terms of kids demonstrating that they've actually got some proficiency with the kind of skills that we're talking about.
Right.
So anyway, well, hey, again, thank you so much. I really, again, appreciate your time. Fascinating kind of environment that you've built, and congratulations. It's a phenomenal thing.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, and our paths on our life's journeys are going to cross in the future.
I hope so. I really hope so. I will do everything in my power to make that happen. In fact, I want to talk to you about doing Log from the Sea of Cortez. I'm just so intrigued by the process. So
cool.
We'll talk.
All right.
Jerome, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been RebootEd podcast, and we'll be on again next week, hopefully with another guest. Thanks for watching.